Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 66 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is Mackay Rippey, and the topic of the show is Lyme Ninja. Mackay Rippey is an acupuncturist practicing in New York for over 25 years. He graduated from St. Mary's College of Maryland with a BA in English Literature in 1986, and later studied acupuncture at the Maryland Institute of Integrative Health. His interest in acupuncture was inspired by his father, and he was the youngest person in his class. He was one of the first people in the United States to earn a master's degree in acupuncture. He studied Five-Element Acupuncture, a traditional form of acupuncture based on the oral tradition founded by JR Worsley. He specializes in chronic Lyme disease and works with clients with chronic pain, anxiety, panic attacks, and other complex chronic conditions. He is the host of the popular podcast Lyme Ninja Radio, which is quickly approaching its 200th episode with some of the thought leaders in the realm of Lyme disease, and it brings free content to thousands of listeners. Lyme Ninja Radio is the creator of the free Lyme Symptom tracker tool, which provides an easy way to track your Lyme symptoms. And now, my interview with Mackay Rippey. We have the founder of Lyme Ninja Radio with us today, Mackay Rippey. Thanks for being here, Mackay.
You're very welcome, Scott. I'm excited to speak with you.
Yeah, I am as well. Tell us a little bit about what got you interested in the whole world of Lyme disease. Did you or someone close to you have their own personal Lyme experience?
Well, I do have Lyme disease. I got it about 15 years ago. I was downstate. I'm in central New York right now. I was down on the Hudson River in a little town called Ghent and doing some Indian wrestling with some friends in their backyard. And after a couple days after that, was sicker than a dog. It was the worst flu I'd ever had in my life. One of those things where you crawl into the bathroom saying, please just take me now because I feel so lousy. Interestingly enough, Sunday morning, I'm dragging myself to the bathroom. I kind of look in the mirror, looking in my eyes, and they're all bloodshot. I feel like hell. And on my left arm was the bullseye rash. Oh. And the strangest thing, I instantly felt better. And probably because I didn't know a whole lot about Lyme disease at the time.
So you think you felt better just because you kind of knew what was happening?
Yeah, it's like, I got a diagnosis now. So we, went off to the local ER, St. Elizabeth's, and, they had everybody who was on duty go through and look at my arm because they'd never seen a bullseye rash before.
Wow.
And the attending physician said, we did the test. We'll do the test, but, you've got the rash, so we're going to give you 10 days of doxycycline. So I had my 10 days of doxycycline. And luckily, I was young enough, healthy enough, followed up with some herbal medicine, which I think was Teasel, not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was Teasel, and did some follow-up acupuncture. And for the most part, my wife says I lost some of my hairline, and she says I lost about 1 inch of my hairline during this event. And probably have more fatigue than I should, but came out of it okay. It's like I was one of the really lucky ones. So that was my introduction to Lyme disease.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in acupuncture. So for those people that are listening, not only do you do Lyme Ninja Radio, but you're also an acupuncturist and you work with people with Lyme. So how did you get interested in acupuncture? And then I know there were some challenges even getting into acupuncture school as well.
Well, that story is the stories they tell about thousands of years ago. So, a young man would be interested in acupuncture and he'd go to the master's window and kind of, knock on the window or knock on the door and said, please take me as your student, and they prostrate themselves and bow down. And the master would just say, go away. Right. And if the student was interested and really committed, they come back the next day and so forth and so on. At some point, the master lets them in the room, says, okay, you can sweep the floors and do the dishes. And eventually, after many, many months, maybe many, many years, they begin to get closer and closer to the treatment table. And that was my experience with acupuncture. My dad was a patient. So this is in the mid 80s. So acupuncture was people still didn't know what it was at that point. I tell them I'm studying acupuncture and still would get, well, what's acupuncture? Now at least everybody knows what it is.
Right.
So it was really kind of weird. And he's a conventional sort of man. He's not, he was a lobbyist in DC. He's not out there too much, a little bit, but not too much. So he's a patient and he has materials laying around the house. And I started reading these during breaks from college. And at some point, just the light bulb went off, right? And I started out this very short conversation. This is really interesting. You should study this. And then the voice was like, well, I am going to go study this. And that was it. There's no, can you make a living doing this? What's it going to be like in the next 20 years? None of that. That was it. It was like, I'm going to go study this. So I went and applied to the acupuncture school. There were 2 in the country at the time. I applied to the local one. And they said, you're too young, go away. I knocked on the door and they said, go away. So I came back next year. I said, well, you're still too young, but you're back again. So you must really want to be an acupuncturist. Stay an extra year. And I didn't quite get my finances lined up. So I had to go away another year. So I go away a second time, happen to get married in between. I come back the third year. They say, oh, you again, right? You're married. Okay, so you can come and study acupuncture. So that was my introduction to learning about acupuncture.
So were you already then working with Lyme clients in your acupuncture practice before you had Lyme yourself, or did you get drawn into working with Lyme clients because of your own personal journey?
It was part of my personal journey. And really, actually, one of my first patients was a Lyme patient. So this is in Southern Maryland. And she came into my office, bless her heart, had an attack, a neurological pain attack on my table, and just curled into the fetal position and whimpered for about 20 minutes. And there's nothing to do, basically hold her hand and make sympathetic noises. So that was my first introduction to really bad Lyme disease. And looking back in my practice, there are probably several dozen people who had Lyme or some other stealth infection that went undiagnosed. But I didn't really get focused on Lyme disease myself until two things happened. One is a good friend of mine, Greg Lee, who you probably know. I think he's speaking at your conference, actually, right?
He was actually on my podcast last week.
Hi, Greg. So I knew he was really getting into Lyme disease and studying it and treatments. So I knew that was out there and was kind of following him a little bit in the work that he was doing. And then Lyme disease started being diagnosed in my community. So based on what Greg was saying, that it's poorly diagnosed, there are no great treatments for it, the physicians for the most part are failing over and over again, I thought, well, if it's starting to show up in my community, I better get ahead of the curve and start learning about Lyme disease so I can begin to help these people as they start showing up.
Thank goodness you did, because you're helping in a couple of ways now, in really big ways, and showing up for people. So from 2003, then, when you first got sick, you said that you got back to a reasonably good place with some of the treatment that you did initially. Did you continue to have symptoms from 2003 until fairly recently, or did you feel like you were asymptomatic and you were beyond it?
If you had asked me that last year, I said, well, I'm mostly asymptomatic. And again, energy-wise, probably not where I should be, but 90% there. I could do what I wanted to do. I had the strength that I needed. Mentally, emotionally, I probably had some dips in there, but I kind of have a history of that anyway. So, yeah, and there's nothing you could hang your hat on and say, yep, you're still having Lyme symptoms. But kind of looking back, and even at the time and knowing about how Lyme kind of creeps around in the background, yeah, but I was functional. I could do what I wanted to do. Maybe I needed a little extra rest at time. Maybe I got tired before I should, or my motivation wasn't there, but nothing glaring.
That was kind of my experience as well. So I first got sick in 97. From about 2000 to 2004, I had a period where I thought I had recovered just working on more holistic medicine, didn't even know it was Lyme. But there were a few weird things that happened from time to time that didn't seem quite right. And yet I thought, well, it was just the, gut issues or whatever as a result from some things that I had experienced previously. And then it all kind of came back, which led us to figuring out eventually that Lyme was a big piece of the puzzle. So I also had that period in between where for several years I felt reasonably good. I could work, I could function pretty well. But when I was bad, I was bad. And it sounds like that's similar to your experience at the beginning as well. It sounds like last May you woke up and you had some new symptoms, that you had an issue using your arm. How long did that last? Can you tell us about that? Do you think it was related to Lyme? And were you doing acupuncture with your feet at that time? Or what were you doing there?
Well, to tell us some secrets, it wasn't with my feet, but similar, maybe. So this was really weird. And I mean, this is one of the frustrations with the current state of testing for Lyme disease. I'll never know whether this was Lyme or a viral attack. So basically what happened, and there's a name for the syndrome. It's called, I'm going to forget what the syndrome is now. Oh no, Parsonage-Turner syndrome. There we go. And what happened was I could not use my right arm. I was lucky enough to be able to move my fingers, but I couldn't, like, for example, pick up my seltzer. There was zero strength, zero movement in the beginning. And it did come on basically over 24 hours. So I woke up one morning and it felt funny. I could still move it, but it felt funny. And then the next day, there was zero movement. So my first thought is, oh my God, you're having a stroke. And then I kind of checked in and went through the other symptoms that, people tend to have with stroke. It's like, this isn't a stroke. This is, fill in the blank. This is Lyme disease, right? This is something happened, some infection. And I'll take you through kind of what happened, then go back and my thoughts on it. So in the beginning, just didn't move. It didn't really hurt at the time, just lack of function. And then the pain started. Maybe that's the nerve starting to heal. Maybe that's the inflammation starting to cause problems. And it got worse at night, which is actually part of the syndrome. It was worse at night. So my ability to sleep went in the toilet. And it got to the point where I couldn't lie on it, obviously, because of the pain. I couldn't lie on the other side and sleep. So I started trying to sleep on the sofa and would get all the pillows I could find to try and prop it up and not put pressure on it and maybe get a couple hours of sleep. After watching like 30 reruns of NCIS, I watched the whole during this time, all of NCIS. Eventually the theme put me to sleep, I think, hypnotically. But that was going, and that went on for, the pain was intense probably for about 2-3 weeks, 2 weeks for sure. And then the pain started easing up some. I went to, finally my wife said, you got to do something about this, right? So I go to urgent care, and urgent care, they were actually pretty good diagnosis. The nurse practitioner did a couple tests. She said, this is neurological. We don't do neurological. Go to the ER. The ER said, well, they did a couple CAT scans, right? They did shoulder and neck. Well, it's not your neck. It's not your shoulder. We think you have a rotator cuff issue. It's like, okay. So I went to see an orthopedic the following day. Orthopedic did like 2 tests and said, no, your rotator's fine. This is some bizarre neurological thing. Good luck. He's actually kind of a family friend, and he really did say good luck with that because you're going to have trouble finding diagnosis. So finally, I did not have, shame on me, I didn't have a family practitioner. I didn't have a GP. And it took several weeks to find one up here in Central New York. If you don't have one, get one now, because when you need one, you'll need one. So even if you don't do medicine, like I didn't do medicine, there'll be a time when you'll want one. So just go through the pain of getting yourself a doctor if you don't already have one. So that's tip number 1. That's worth the price of listening to this right there. If you don't have one, get one, because otherwise you have no access to the medical system other than urgent care and the ER. And that's not enough. Anyway, so I finally get my doc. He says, yeah, it looks like something neurological, and let's get you tested. So they did the nerve conduction study, and yeah, you got some nerve damage. And the doc doing the nerve conduction asked me 1,000 different ways, did you injure your arm? And I answered him 1,000 different times, no. So you go back to my primary and he says, well, we got nothing for you. I could give you some physical therapy. However, I am concerned that that'll just cause more inflammation and more damage. So I'm not really in favor of that. If you want it, I'll give it to you. But I said, no. I don't want any physical therapy either. So in the meantime, I'm treating myself, not with my toes. Actually did the Cowden protocol. I was like, okay, if I have an active infection, no matter what it is, the Cowden protocol will take care of it. So, I started with 1 drop thinking it might be active, just like it says on the sheet, and worked my way up. No hercs at all. So, I was like, well, by the time I started treating myself, there wasn't anything active at the time. So I went through I did a full month and then plus some. So, but after 6 weeks, it's like, well, this isn't really accelerating my healing. There's no hercs from it. I don't think it's an active infection. I started bringing in other herbs. This is one of Greg Lee's protocols. He does something called wet cupping, teaches something called wet cupping.
Yeah.
And it's a euphemism for bleeding. So you do a little bit of bleeding. So I had my daughter, Aurora, the producer of the show, do some cupping on the shoulder. And it's really interesting because in the affected area and the infected area, the blood that came out, and we're talking about, like a tablespoon of blood. We're not talking about cups of blood. It comes out like Jell-O, the grossest, reddest Jell-O you've ever seen in your life. And if you move just a little bit out of the area where it's not, the blood just rose, it's bright red, it flows, it's liquid. So there's something about this infected, damaged area where it's this methemoglobin or something that's happening where the blood is congealing and not carrying oxygen well and not flowing well. And the cupping just draws that sticky goop out of there so you can get fresh blood into the area. So we did that a couple times, and that seemed to help some. Probably 2 things helped the most, however, and one was some light therapy. So I started with ice. So at the point where I stopped sleeping, I said, I need to numb this pain so I can get some kind of rest. So I started with ice on that, and that helped a little bit. But I was using bags of peas. As soon as they warm up and you wake up and the pain's right back, and wasn't thrilled with the results with that. And so I brought home from my office the LED man makes this little LED thing, and it's got 850 and 660 nanometers. So it's got some infrared and some red light. And I started using that on the arm, and believe it or not, that took the pain away. Even to the point where I'd fall asleep. I burned myself a little bit because I fell asleep with it and left it on for too long. Nothing significant there, but there were some red dots from the LEDs that were there for a couple months before the skin finally healed up. Yeah, but it wasn't, you never blistered or anything that strong. But that took the pain away, allowed a little bit of sleep in the beginning. So again, once I started sleeping a little bit, I think the healing process really kicked in. And then what made the biggest breakthrough, and which gave me hope, was I fasted for a couple days. So I thought I was on a ketogenic diet at the time. I started measuring my ketones, and they weren't that great. They were just a very low level. And I was using the breath test, not blood test at the time. So I said, well, let's get into full-blown ketosis because ketogenic diet's good for your nerves, blah, blah, blah. So I did a salad fast. I didn't go 100% water, but I ate some salad with some olive oil and a little vinegar for full 48 hours. And during that period of time, the function of my arm just increased amazingly. And it was like, okay, so it's like my body can heal. So that really gave me some hope. And I continued on the strict ketogenic for a while. And that was really the beginning. At that point, things improved I could see a small improvement every single day. And then there were milestones like being able to hold a coffee cup. And then the last one was being able to lift my hand above my shoulder like this.
So at this point, you have 100% function back again, it looks like?
At this point, yes. Strength, no. Motion, movement, yes. It's still pretty weak. So things like I was holding a pot of water the other day, a full pot of water, and not a giant pot, but just a saucepan full of water. And my hand it was hard to rotate it. So there's still some significant weakness that I've got to recover. So that's my goal right now. So all the way back to the beginning. I know there's a lot of story here, all the way back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So it was either a recurrence of the Lyme. So, I've asked a lot of the people I've interviewed, what do you think of this? And it turns out that the bacteria, the Lyme can, as we know, attack the nerves too. It doesn't have to be a virus. I was thinking it was something viral. Kind of look back 2 weeks before this started. I was out in the morning, not dressed properly, got chilled to the bone. So it really, to me, sounded an awful lot like kind of like a Bell's palsy attack, that same sort of thing. So I personally think it was a viral thing. And the other funny thing is 6 months prior, I had 2 bouts of stomach bug, food poisoning. And the last one I had gotten in Thailand. I ate some cart food, and everybody else had stuff, and I had something special, and it was special. As only food poisoning can be, right? So that was brutal. And then about 6 months before that, at home at a local restaurant, I had just gotten a bout of food poisoning. And really, I can't remember. Maybe as a kid I had a stomach bug or something. That's not something that crops up a lot. So my gut most likely was interfered with, and there's quite a bit of research out there about food poisoning and affecting the gut bacteria. So my immune system in my gut was not in great shape. Then I go through this chill, which gave me a serious knock on my immune system and probably started things there. And then lack of sleep and stress and all the kind of the normal things. And then, you wake up one day and things fall apart slowly, and then all of a sudden.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So did you continue while you were doing the light therapy and the wet cupping? Did you continue doing the herbs and the Cowden protocol as well to address potential microbial issues, or did you stop that?
I stopped the Cowden protocol. I brought in some of the classical pearls, Chinese herbs, to do more of nourishing of the herbs, the nerves. Sorry.
And that's
did some more
classical
nourishing.
pearls. Is that Heiner Frohoff? Is that
yes, that's exactly who that
Oregon,
is.
Right? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about those. Do you use those in your practice with your clients as well?
I do use them quite a bit. They have lines specifically for Lyme disease, lightning and dragon pearls, right, and thunder, and a couple other for infections, especially Lyme disease. So I was using the lightning pearls, and they're specifically formulated for not only the infection, but to rebuild after the infection attacks the nerves. So that I used those. And then just basic nutrition too. I had my 23andMe, and I follow Bob Miller's work there. So I was looking in there and seeing, what support I add that way. Making sure I was getting some cod liver oil, the vitamin A there. I'm still, let me ask you, what do you think of vitamin D? You kind of hear these both ways. Where do you sit on vitamin D? I think
that ideally, if someone's doing supplementation of vitamin D, they should measure their D25 and D125 first. And if the D125 is elevated, significantly higher than the D25, but I would say if it's higher at all, then they probably need to have focus on dealing with some of the intracellular microbes before they start really supporting a lot of vitamin D. The other thing that's been interesting, and Dr. Raj Patel talked about this in the podcast as well, is people that have the VDR issues with the vitamin D receptor mutations or SNPs. Many of those people respond really well to narrow band ultraviolet light therapy. And so I've been doing that as well for about the last year, almost year and a half. And I was previously taking about 12,000 units a day of vitamin D and had a pretty good level. Probably it was around 80, sometimes even a little higher than that. Now I'm down to 2,000 units a day, and my vitamin D level is 130. So, I think the light therapy can be interesting. I do think that most people do need some vitamin D, but if they haven't addressed the intracellular pathogens, I think they need to either do that at the same time or at least be looking at that. Just supplementing vitamin D, only looking at D25, I think may not always be the best direction.
Right. It's kind of like measuring the thyroid with only a couple of the numbers. You don't get the whole picture. Okay.
So
Thanks for that.
You mentioned teasel, you mentioned the Cowden protocol, you mentioned classical pearls. Are there any other herbal products or product lines that you found helpful in your recovery or that you work with clients with today?
Well, right now I am taking biocidin.
Oh, cool.
And that's the one I'm experimenting. So I have used this as an opportunity to experiment with myself.
Yeah.
And I like to do that before or with, recommending things to patients. So I'm using Biocide. Interestingly enough, in the past 6 weeks, I started getting some wrist pain. So, that's much more like a Lyme kind of thing, traveling joint pain. So that has inspired me to take up the Biocide. And I have to report kind of after 2 months now, it's significantly better. So I'm taking a prophylactic dose, maybe a minor healing. So it's not a high level. I'm taking about 5 drops a day of the liquid. And the other thing I'm kind of looking into now, I just had the DNA of my gut sequenced with a company called Thrive. They're new out there. And I'm interested to see what happens after some targeted probiotic work. Because, I've always taken probiotics in the background, but never, we're starting to get to the point where they've got some ideas about, okay, let's push a little bit over this way and see what happens.
Right. Yeah. And the Biocidin makes a lot of sense, especially given that you had the gut issues that kind of happened before a lot of these things. I like that. I like Rachel Fresco. I like the Biocidin. She's got the liposomal one as well, which gets a little more into some of the intracellular microbes. So yeah, I think she's got some great tools. In fact, I used Biocidin when I first got sick, literally 20 years ago, when at the time they thought, oh, you must have a parasite. And so we went after it with Biocidin. And so it's definitely a product that stood the test of time and still is very helpful for many people.
Yeah. And I plan on going back I'm doing the liquid now because I am interested in trying to get my gut back in order before, and I probably could do the liposomal at the same time, but I'm starting with the liquid so it gets a little bit more into the digestive system. And then I'll probably switch over to the LSF.
So let's talk about the role of diet and nutrition, both in your recovery, but thoughts that you have in terms of kind of the Lyme population, the Lyme community. What should we be looking at in terms of diet? Are there some kind of things that you've observed over the years that you can share with us?
It's the fundamental piece. And the other thing about it, it's the cheapest form of medicine. And in some ways, there's a story, doctor, it hurts when I hit my thumb with a hammer. And the doctor says, stop hitting your thumb with a hammer. And so much of our diet is hitting our bodies with a hammer. It's just the food is so bad, standard diet. And it's masked because, again, we talked about earlier, things fall apart slowly until they fall, all of a sudden. The wheels come off the bus. So the lug nuts are loose on most people, and it takes something like Lyme disease or some other accident, and then all of a sudden everything falls apart. And they have to go back and say, well, what's wrong with my diet? I've been doing this for 50 years, and I've been fine, for the 50 years. Well, what medications you're on? Well, I'm on this, and this. Fine. Right?
Yeah,
but exactly. It's controlled. Yeah. So diet is critical. It's critical. And there are different schools of thoughts in there. Let me just go on. I'm not a fan of full-blown vegetarian or vegan. I think it's fine for a cleansing period. I do think it can help people bridge for cleaning up their diets. But for long-term, meaning more than, 3 to 6 months, it's really tough to get the nutrition that you need as a vegan. It's just hard. And if you can do it, bless you, you're a better person than most. And I totally understand, I live on a farm. I totally understand wanting to take care of the animals and not doing harm to them. The way we factory farm things is atrocious. It's evil. There's no doubt about it. But there are ways to farm and support people who don't treat animals that way as well. So I understand the moral parts of that. So clean up your diet, number one. And that's the easy part. You got to get rid of the vegetable oils and the sugars. Start there. And then you can get into, okay, what are the things that might be irritating your gut, either because you genetically can't process them or because your gut's so messed up that anything you're putting in right now that's slightly irritating is going to make it worse. And that's the wheats, the gluten, the dairy stuff, the beans, the typical paleo type of conversation. And then it's like start putting in the healthier things. And it's green vegetables, Fruit is nature's candy. It's designed to seduce birds and people. So you eat it and you poop out the seeds somewhere else. That's what fruit is for. And yeah, it comes with all these antioxidants and stuff like that. But that's so you don't die while you're eating it.
Great.
I've heard, that's not my line, but it's kind of true. So you need leafy vegetables and you need lots of them. So with my clients, there are very similar approaches out there, whether it's paleo, whether it's autoimmune paleo, whether it's Terry Walls and her protocol, whether it's a ketogenic diet. I kind of try to meet my patient where they are. I recently had a nurse come in for treatment. And so I presented her Dr. Walls and she said, yes, this resonates with me. She's a doctor. I trust that. So they're very, very similar, and all pretty much start in the same place. But it's important. If you haven't changed your diet, if you're still eating Twinkies, stop.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's amazing to me that someone's trying to recover from Lyme and they're still eating gluten every day. I mean, it's just another insult that is likely going to hold us back. So tell us, I know you're really knowledgeable about ketogenic diets and whatnot. So tell us a little about the role of healthy fat. Is there a population of people, maybe people that have adrenal issues or other things that might mean that ketogenic may not be good for them? And then is there a certain duration where ketogenic is good, but is it also good for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or is there a more limited time on a ketogenic diet?
So this is my opinion. I'm not going to claim that I'm a scientist studying this stuff and have the answers. So let's start there. Second caveat is no one diet is good for everybody. It isn't. If you go through the diet section in Barnes & Noble, all diet books start the same way. I was sick, I ate this diet, now I'm healed, and they have 30 testimonials. And I believe everybody's telling the truth. The trouble is, this is the way I see it, is we used to live in a certain region with certain foods in a certain climate and certain traditions. And over the generations, that got sorted out. Now, different things would happen. Invading armies would come in and the DNA would get mixed up. But for the most things were more or less figured out. And then we've got the new world and people start moving. And all of a sudden, like I've got an Italian mother and an Irish father. So what should I be eating? Italian food or Irish food, boiled potatoes. And so the DNA is mixed up. And then you're in the US where we've got the modern foods and you've got food fads and all this other kind of things. And we're so confused about what to eat, so confused. So the ketogenic diet, in my mind, is very helpful for people like me who have screwed up their bodies over the years unintentionally and have insulin resistance. Or maybe you have a pathway where you're just not using glycogen very well at all. It's like that pathway just isn't optimized in your body, and you want to use the alternative pathway, which is ketones and fat for fuel instead of this. There's some thought that Alzheimer's, in addition to being maybe infection-based, is also type 3 diabetes. So the brain isn't getting the nutrition that it needs. So I screwed up my gut in retrospect with 30 years of Diet Coke. And I had a high school lacrosse coach that said, you really shouldn't be drinking soda, but if you have to, don't drink the sugar stuff, drink the diet stuff. So I took that as like, drink all the diet soda you wanted. So for 30 years, I drank Diet Coke. And I remember listening to another podcast where the interviewing a bariatric physician out of Johns Hopkins, and he said, aspartame is a mild antibiotic and it will mess up your gut bacteria. And sure enough, over the years, my body mass kept on getting worse and worse and worse till it got to the point now that I really have to limit my sugars because my body no longer processes them very well. It just goes immediately into fat instead of being used for fuel. And that's, it's a sad fact. So I can gain 20 pounds between Thanksgiving and Christmas without blinking. And that's not like hitting the cookies 24 hours a day. That's just having some potatoes, a roll, just little things like that. So for somebody like me, moving toward the ketogenic side is important. And kind of the old Atkins, the old protein power type diets, they were focusing on replacing sugars with proteins. The problem with that is something called, I'm going to blank on it right now. There's my Lyme brain kicking in. It's the body's ability to switch from growth mode to not growth mode. And help me out. What's it called, Scott? It's okay. Anyway, it'll come to me like in 15 minutes. So what happens with protein is your body's getting us epigenetic signal to grow.
You mean like anabolic and catabolic?
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
there's a particular, anyway, there's a particular gene that gets switched on and off with these different modes. So insulin it stimulates growth.
Mm-hmm.
Eating proteins, the body says, yeah, we've got plenty of materials here. Let's go ahead and build new tissue. And it needs to shut down. There needs to be a yin and the yang. You need recovery mode from this as well. So you clean out and recover, and so the telomeres get cleaned up at the end of your DNA. So if you're always pushing protein into the system, and I see so many of my patients, they're on protein powders. It's like, just stop, eat an egg, and then take a break. You don't need to be pounding the protein. So the ketogenic diet moderates the protein, it brings it down and ups the fat, which sounds so crazy for some people still. But fat is this amazing nutrient dense superfood that's gotten a bad rap. And it started 100 some years ago when Crisco first came on the scene. And Crisco is, hydrolyzed cottonseed oil. It's evil. It's the beginning of fat is evil, because it's not natural. There's nothing wrong with lard. There's nothing wrong with tallow. There's nothing wrong with these animal fats, duck fat that we used to eat. It was the core of the diet. When the Eskimos were eating food, they would eat all the interior and the fat, and they would give the lean meat to the dogs. It's like, this is what people used to eat. And then our palates changed and the world changed. And now we're all just doing steaks, and all the organ meats get tossed away into hot dogs. We've got it backwards. We've got it totally backwards. So anyway, the ketogenic flips that on its head. And I think a lot of people out there are starved for fat-based nutrition, all the other nutrients that come along with fat. And that's, your vitamin E's are fat-based, the vitamin D is fat-based, vitamin A comes along with the fats, plus there are all kinds of other things. We all know about kind of like the nutrients that come along for the ride in fruits and vegetables, the phytochemicals. Oh, these are so wonderful. But there's a whole range of fat-based nutrition too that we don't get, especially for people who are doing low-fat diets. And again, some people survive well, like their body can take a little bit and they've got the proper gut bacteria, so they're making lots of fat in their gut, and their body can take just a little bit and use it. Other people are starving. And so a ketogenic diet, which I'm a fan of in general, really ups your fat like crazy, switches the pathway from burning glycogen as fuel and moves it over to fat. In a healthy person, you could go back and forth even during a day. But what happens if it gets stuck? Then, like for me, it's like I never use glucose very well at all. So my body is just, my brain's better, my thinking's better. And it's like, so I have to confess, like last night I had a pizza. It's probably one reason I can't remember that word, because my brain's not functioning very well. True confessions.
So do you then do the ketogenic diet primarily with dietary changes, or do you use any exogenous ketones?
I've tried the exogenous ketones, a couple different ones, and they're interesting because they will give you a temporary boost for sure. And I think they're a good crutch, especially in the beginning. And then there's also this idea where you want ketones at a therapeutic level. So people dealing with serious things like cancer, having mild level ketones in the body is useful. But if you get it up, and then I think the blood levels are like 1.2 and above. Once you get into high ketones, then all of a sudden there's this therapeutic aspect. And essentially the body's pushing the ketones through the cells. And the thinking, especially with cancer, is that it can be a metabolic disease. Maybe it's a metabolic disease more than a DNA-based genetic problem. And the genetics actually get changed after the body's essentially starving. The cells start starving, and they change because they're fermenting carbohydrates now, because the carbohydrate pathways are so impaired that that's the next phase. And I think that's a lot of the fibromyalgia symptoms that people have with Lyme disease. The other thing is ketogenic diet may be the most anti-inflammatory diet out there. It metabolically, ketones and fat produce less inflammation. So part of just the body making energy, ATP, it produces superoxide. And there's just less of it produced when you're burning fat for fuel and then recycling ketones. On the glycolysis side, you burn glycogen, one of the byproducts is lactic acid. Now, lactic acid can be burned for fuel. It kind of has to go back to the liver and get transformed into pyruvate again. I think it's pyruvate. And then can be burned again through the system. But the lactic acid is what makes your body sore. It's kind of when a runner or a cyclist hits the wall, there's like the body has enough lactic acid, and that's enough. On the other side, it's just a cleaner burn. It's just a cleaner burn.
Yeah, I definitely believe that the healthy fats are an important part of the nutritional aspect of dealing with recovering from some chronic illness as well. I've had my tablespoon of chia seeds this morning, my tablespoon of Body Bio Balance Oil, all the good fats to get started for the day. So I definitely agree there. I haven't done as much exploration into the ketogenic diet, but it is something that I probably should explore further.
One of my favorite things to do, sorry to interrupt is to go to the farmer's market, get some clean bacon and cook the bacon. And we save the lard. We put it in a jar in the refrigerator, and we'll use that to cook with vegetables and everything else. It's the nutrient composition is very similar to olive oil. I mean, that's another thing that
I remember my grandmother used to do that when I was young as well. She had her little jar of bacon grease by the side of the stove there.
Exactly.
What are some of the key things that people with Lyme disease are trying to figure out? And then what advice would you give them in terms of the things they're trying to explore and figure out?
With the disease like Lyme disease and the co-infections and the other infections that come along and the other problems, there's so much unknown. The biggest thing is trying to sort out what the wheat from the chaff, the signal from the noise. There's so many voices out there claiming to know what's going on, but nobody's cracked the code. Mm-hmm. Scott, nobody 100% knows what's going on. I think, we're all with the story of the wise man, 3 wise men touching different parts of the elephant, saying, oh, an elephant's this long snake-like thing. Oh, it's this big, So that's kind of what's going on with Lyme disease right now. And that's the hardest part. And, I was just doing an interview before I talked to you. And so much of this is the transformation, the hero's journey. So at some point you talk to people who've kind of on the other side of recovery, and they get to this moment where they take on the responsibility. It's not that they can't trust your doctor. It's like you can't rely on your doctor 100%. You can't rely on your acupuncturist 100%. I have to do this myself. And there's so many moving pieces and interrelated pieces that you may get a little golden nugget from here and over here, and you really need to put together your protocol. So that's my biggest message at this point. Until somebody really gets deep and cracks the code, and maybe it's happening as we speak. Maybe there is somebody out there, so I don't want to discount that. But there's so much going on. I have this woman who I think her mast cells just got activated. We're doing this treatment, this laser treatment for her, and had great success with reducing her pain and removing these little funny skin bumps that she had. She came in, we did this treatment, and she called me the next day and was just in agony because her whole body was itching. And this is a new symptom. It's like, where did this come from? And we've been doing something we've been doing all along. So Lyme disease, so she got to a point where, things were going along and probably falling apart slowly, and then everything fell apart quickly on her. Her mast cells got activated like that. So there's so many things like that that's going on. So listen to your podcast, listen to all these different voices, listen to the experts. But then if something isn't working, don't be afraid to move on. Mm-hmm. Simply because, man, we've got good ideas, and start with the basics. Fix your sleep, fix your diet, fix the stress in your life. Start with those 3 things. And until you have those in place, good luck with the rest of it.
So that was actually going to be my next question. Based on your experience and you're working with your clients, the top priorities in terms of recovering from Lyme. So it sounds like sleep, diet, and stress.
Yeah. I mean, just really the fundamentals. the stuff your grandma told you about. It's like, she was right. Listen to her. And that's the foundation. You got to have the foundation. From there you can begin to branch out and get into the different herbs and find out what works best for you. Do you have mold exposure, heavy metals, so forth and so on. But if you don't have those foundational things, listen, if you can't sleep, you can't heal. There's no point in throwing tons of antibiotics and all this other stuff because your body's not going to use them optimally. That was my experience. When I got sick this past May, it's like it took me a month to recover from not sleeping for a month. So if you haven't been sleeping well for a couple of years, I get by with my 4 or 5 hours. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah, I totally agree. So critical. What are some of the themes that you've noticed that have emerged when talking to people about how they recover from Lyme?
I'm going to move from there's this moment in time, kind of this hero's journey, where they claim the hero's role. So in the beginning, you're sick, you kind of fill into the normal pattern of, I'm going to go find an expert, the best in the world. It's so funny. I'm in New York, right? So whenever you talk to somebody, their guy is always the best in the world. Yeah, I'm going to see the heart guy. He's the best in the world. It's like, everybody's the best in the world. You want to see the best in the world. So they go find the best that they can get there, the best in the world. And then they don't get better, and at some point they reach a level of frustration or enlightenment or a combination of the two where it's like, okay, I need to do this myself. And that's the moment where they feel empowered. Now, the struggle's not over. They still have to figure everything out, but they're no longer the victim. So that's the healing moment that I hear in all these interviews that I've done over the years, that there's this moment where they take responsibility for themselves. And that's the key. So my original Lyme story, I was lucky. I went to the expert. They gave me enough antibiotics to kill off enough of the bugs that I felt kind of okay for a good 15 years. I was lucky. But, if that's not your story, if you've got this recurring Lyme syndrome or Lyme disease, you don't even know what it is at this point. But if you're still suffering, then that's the key, is not to keep putting hope on, okay, I'm going to go to this center or to this doctor and they're going to fix me. This guy is it. It's like, no, they're your guide along the way. They can help you figure it out, but you need to grasp the bull by the horns.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's probably a certain duration into the treatment when you finally can do that. I think at a certain point, people are probably impacted enough that they can't quite take that role. But I hear what you're saying. You get to a place where you've gone through it enough, you understand enough that then you need to be the one ultimately that's driving your healing journey. Totally agree with that.
Absolutely. If you're flat on your back and you can't even, get out of bed, you need all the help you can get. You need helpers in your life. Totally. Yeah.
So talk to us a little about the differences in terms of how doctors and researchers, as compared to patients, talk with you about Lyme disease and being sick with Lyme disease.
Yeah, this is one of the root causes of so much of dissension in the Lyme world. So you and I say Lyme disease, and we mean mold exposure and heavy metal toxin. We mean this whole galaxy of our experience. But doctors, they're technicians. And researchers are even more technical. So when they say Lyme disease, they mean an infection by Borrelia burgdorferi, and that's it. So, and again, even a researcher is that specific, and they're even doing smaller pieces of that. So you go into a doctor's office and you say, I think I may have Lyme disease. They test you for Lyme disease, even if let's say the test is accurate, and it comes back negative, then, you don't have Lyme disease. So they've just taken all this infectious possibility and put it to the side because you don't have Lyme disease. And, then you go back into the Lyme community and start talking to people and say, well, it could be this, it could be Bartonella, it could be mycoplasma, it could be all these other things that look and feel a lot like Lyme disease. But because you've kind of shut the door with your physician, they once the door is closed in medicine, it doesn't open until you go get a second opinion somewhere completely in a different town. You can't even go to the same town because the doctors all talk to each other. So once that door's shut, you got to go get a second opinion somewhere else. So I think that's one of the real painful things there. So the way we approach and speak to physicians is imprecise because we're not speaking their language. And so they poo-poo us Because like, well, I've tested 10 of these people and none of them have Lyme disease. And they don't know that the test is bad. They don't know there could be other co-infections. But in their mind, it's like, these people with Lyme disease, say they have Lyme disease, they're crazy. So I'm not gonna deal with that. They keep coming back at me. It's all in their head. I've tested them. There's nothing wrong with them. So I think that is critical to understand that the language needed to talk to a doctor is different than your friends on Facebook.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about Lyme disease, I think even if you could take that person, snap your fingers and make Borrelia go away, I'm not convinced that they're going to feel significantly better, because there's always these other layers of things. Their moldy house, their Bartonella, their Babesia, their viruses, their emotional traumas and conflicts, their poor diet, their sleep issues. I mean, it's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So totally agree with that. What would you recommend if someone came to you and they thought they had Lyme disease, or if someone came to you and they've been sick for a long time with Lyme disease? What kinds of recommendations would you give to those people?
So let's split this up.
Sure.
So the first is somebody who seems to have a recent infection.
Mm-hmm. Or thinks they may have Lyme, yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, of course, is like, don't rely on the test. Treat yourselves as if you had Lyme disease. So beg, borrow, cheat, steal, absolutely get some antibiotics to begin with. Whatever you need to do, tell them it's a sinus infection, whatever you need to do, get the antibiotics, get on 30 days of antibiotics if you can, and more, if you can stretch that out. And, I don't like to advocate lying to your doctor, but you have to lead them down to understanding what you need, and you can help them do that. Again, speak their language. So if it's a recent exposure, definitely do that, and then follow up with herbal medicine. Like we talked about biocidin, we talked about the classical pearls, the Cowden protocol. There are lots of protocols out there to continue, and I would continue. Good grief, at least 6 months after, right? And then if symptoms tended to come back after that, I would add them in. I mean, I've had people come to me and said, yeah, I got tested. It came back positive. I had my 2 weeks antibiotics. I feel great. And I say, that's great. What else are you going to do? Right. And they said, no, I really think I'm okay. I said, tell you what, keep my card. If you're feeling bad in 3 months, give me a call. And inevitably they call. I said, wow, my symptoms have come back again. It's like, of course they came back. I wish you would have loved, talked to me before. So then you have to pick up the pieces and start over again. So that's the one thing. For people who think it may be Lyme disease, then the testing is starting to come together a little bit. Like Klinghart's work is really interesting with the PCR and doing the ultrasound first to disturb the Lyme. So there's some tests out there that definitely seem more sensitive. So definitely, if you can afford to, get tested, but even if you can't, you can still begin treatment as if you were infected, especially if you're doing herbal things. I think there's a lot more forgiveness with the herbal side of things, that you can really begin to, if there is an infection in there, begin to kill off the herbs, but also heal at the same time. If you want to go the antibiotic route, some people want to just want to hammer it. I think that can be useful too. But there does seem to be a point that you reach a point of diminishing returns with the antibiotics. And that's the kind of Dr. Rawls story. I'm sure you've talked with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just, at some point, the antibiotics are doing as much damage as they are helping. So unless your gut's severely compromised, most of us can handle a couple months worth of antibiotics with really out destroying our gut completely. But, you have to wonder about these people. Yeah, I've been doing IV, Rocephin for 2 years. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. What's that done with your gut community, with the biome in your mouth, with the biome in your sinuses? What's going to happen when you come off that? What's the bacteria that's going to take over your gut after that? So that's kind of my global satellite view of those thoughts.
And then how about recommendations for people that have been sick for a long time with Lyme?
And that they know they have Lyme disease?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man. So kind of the three, it's like trying to sort out, is your infection active or not? I think people who've had Lyme for a long time kind of have a sense that they know whether it's active or not. Or are you dealing with the aftermath of your immune system not calming back down again? So where are you at this moment in time? And I think that can change for these people with chronic Lyme. The infection can come back up and cause all kinds of new damage and new kind of symptoms. But I think people have a sense there. And if you're working on calming down your immune system, then you want to be doing things like meditation and breathing exercises and gentle yoga and rebuilding your strength and rebuilding your mitochondria. And again, gentle herbs, and you can't, what's the other thing I want to say about this? You can't push too hard, too fast. Some people feel good. It's like, oh, thank God, I'm feeling like myself again. And then they go out and they train for a half marathon. And then somewhere, and it doesn't happen right away, 3 months in, boom, they get clobbered. So I think being more specific, looking at nutrition from like Bob Miller's point of view, do you have some genetic irregularity that maybe contributes to this that needs general support? Do you not clear out hydrogen peroxide well from your body? Does, your neurotransmitters need support? Is there some genetic? And I think traditional Chinese medicine does this through different signs and symptoms, but the DNA testing kind of gives a modern take on that idea. So that's, and then the basics again, are you sweating? Can you get in the sauna? Can you get some near infrared light? Are you getting sunlight? Are you off the antibiotics so you can be out in the sun again? Put your feet in the ocean, take a swim in a lake, just these grounding, earthing yourself, all these subtle, gentle ways to rebuild.
Yeah, I agree. That's some great recommendations. So let's talk then a little bit about the genetic side of it. So what are your thoughts around the role of genetics as compared to epigenetics in optimizing health? And if we have a certain set of genes, does that mean we're simply doomed and we should just call it end game? Or what are your thoughts around that?
So I'm not a geneticist and I don't play one on TV, but here are my thoughts. Mm-hmm. The body has so many pathways to accomplish the same task, so much redundancy, that even if your genes are broken in an area, very few genetic polymorphisms will cause a disease. And Western medicine knows about those and knows how to test for those. And they're pretty serious. You're really, really sick. So really what we're talking about is genetic efficiency and genetic appropriate expression. So Dr. Shoemaker's work, he says with Lyme disease, 800 genes get turned on. And then what happens is they don't get turned back off again. And that's why you have chronic Lyme disease. And so that's a really interesting thought. So in response to a threat, the body adjusts and begins to go to work, but then doesn't shut these things back off again. Mm-hmm. So the genetics is not, we like to think of it, blue eyes, brown eyes, something simple, something fixed in stone, but it's this messy, things turn on and off, things are half on, half off. So what are you doing to influence your own epigenetics, your genetics at the time? And this gets back to the stress, sleeping well, eating right. What you eat is a genetic signal. I mean, it was part of our connection with the world. Being out in the sunlight is another genetic signal. And we've modern life, I'm going to bash modern life for a little bit. Modern life technology has given us amazing gifts, but we were not designed to have this thing in our face at midnight for hours on Facebook. We're designed to be asleep by the fire. So we've got all these extra stresses, and some of them we don't even know about, whether it's EMFs or the blue light, actually those are the things we know about. And there's stuff out in our community that we don't even know about that's influencing us. So the more you can kind of, I hate to say it this way, but get back to nature, the better. So that's my thought on genetics. It's like, no, you're not stuck. You can regulate yourself. And every once in a while, there are areas where you're just not efficient. So if that makes, if you're somebody who doesn't digest fat well, then either cut back on fats or eat fats in a way that help digest. Eat foods with the fats that help you digest them.
Right. Yeah, I definitely, for people listening, I am not at all of the opinion that your genes are your destiny. I think, unfortunately, genes don't change all that frequently, but what has happened is our environment has changed in terms of the chemicals, the pesticides, the heavy metals, the EMF exposures, all of these things that affect the expression of the genes.
Yes.
And so I actually find it empowering to know, well, if I work on detox, if I work on my environment, if I limit my EMF exposure, if I work on my diet, if I do meditation, reduce my stress, sleep well, that you can influence those things in a big way. And then in some cases, you then need somebody like a Bob Miller who can then come in for specific areas in terms of optimizing and provide nutrients that then can help increase the function of certain pathways. And I think that's a great way. In fact, I'm reading now Ben Lynch's new book, Dirty Genes. And basically it's interesting because I always perceived him years ago to be more of a, you have this SNP, you need this supplement, this SNP, this supplement. And that's kind of the last part of the book. Now, the whole first part is you need to do all the things to clean up your environment, clean up your diet, clean the genes essentially, and then you target things. And so I really like that approach. It's like, yes, maybe there's some specific things you need to do from a supplement perspective, but what are all the things you can do first to optimize the expression of the genes so that that's a very limited focus?
My teacher's teacher, JR Worsley, the kind of founder of modern Five-Element Acupuncture, used to say he said, he used to make fun of people going to health food stores. He said, you ever go to a health food store and the lady who's helping you is feeble. She can barely reach to the top shelf to get you the thing that you want, and you want to help her. And you go into the sweet shop, the pastry shop, and the woman's jolly and she's overweight and she's smiling and having a gun, robust like that. He said, what you eat doesn't matter nearly as much as your ability to draw the nutrition from the food. So this gets to that point. Now, obviously, we just said how important eating is. It absolutely is. And I'm not saying live your life on pastries. But the point is that if your pathways aren't working well or they're narrow, then maybe you do need to adjust things like that. But if you haven't taken care of the basics, if your genetics are all out of whack because you have been eating sugar, like I did to myself, or the genetics of your gut are off because you've been drinking Diet Coke for 30 years, then that's the place to start. To start eliminating these negative cues in your environment to get your body to calm down and to work well.
Absolutely.
Come on, the social stuff, the stress that people are under now because they've got 2,000 friends on Facebook and the 0.1% posts their vacation every day and seems like everybody in the world is on vacation except for you, causes stress.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like it's insane.
Yeah, I totally
agree. Insane that we're under all this stress.
So you mentioned a little bit ago about immune modulation and the immune system being overactive in certain ways. So maybe give us your insights about symptoms being the result of the microbes as compared to symptoms being the result of an immune system that is hyperactive or overactive and creating inflammation as a result of the interaction with the microbe. So is it the bug or is it the way the immune system interacts with the bug? Or both?
If I had the answer to that, I would be talking to you. I'd be sipping margaritas on. Yeah, no, that's let's put it. I had one of my clinical supervisors was a pioneer in animal acupuncture. And she used to say, animals, cats and dogs, particularly inside pets, they don't have a lot of ways to communicate. They don't have language. So they're either going to bite or they're going to piss somewhere. And that's basically what you got. And I think our body is kind of similar. Is the pathways, our alarm pathways to show something's wrong, they get out of whack, or they're not that varied. So whether the insult is coming from a stress or epigenetic changes that the immune system hasn't calmed back down again, it's going to look very similar. So, wrist pain, is it osteoarthritis? Is it from an infection? Is it rheumatoid arthritis? It feels about the same. So sorting that out is important. But again, if you just go back to the basics, the interventions to treat that naturally or more holistically are very, very similar. And it almost, I don't want to say this 100%, it almost doesn't matter. Of course it does matter, but it almost doesn't matter. I mean, if you're having an autoimmune response, throwing more antibiotics or an herb that's simply designed to kill something isn't going to help. But again, that's the beauty of herbal medicine. is that it's not just killing off a bug, it's also a modulation type thing. So that's where kind of you move into this realm of things, the herbal side of things, as opposed to the antibiotic. The antibiotic medicine only does one thing. It's actually doing more, and that's why you have side effects. But that's you're trying to do one thing. So an antibiotic, and that's why you need different antibiotics, because they only have one mechanism, and some works for some bacteria and some works for other bacteria. So that's kind of my messy answer to a messy question.
Well, I think the bug certainly plays a role, but I personally don't think that we ever likely eradicate every Borrelia and every Babesia and every Bartonella from the body. And I think lots of people carry these bugs and they're completely healthy, never identified with any symptoms, never felt they needed to go to a doctor. And it's because their immune system is more tolerant and more integrated with their microbiome. And Dr. Klinghardt talks a lot about this now, and he has actually for many years, where he says the bug itself creates a fairly small percentage of the symptoms, but it's your immune system's reaction to it that creates inflammation, that creates a lot of the symptoms. And so I think, yes, we want to do things to manage and kind of reduce the overgrowths of the microbes, but then looking at the immune system as well, and what can we do to bring down inflammation and to modulate that. And a lot of people have the idea that they want to take things to boost the immune system, because boosting the immune system will get rid of their Lyme disease. But the reality is, I think many or most people with Lyme have some degree of autoimmune or hyperactive immune response, and thus boosting it isn't always what you want to do, right? You want to modulate it, you want to calm it, you want to create integration within our microbiome. And so that's kind of an area I think is going to be really interesting, where, 5 or 10 years from now, do we even perceive Lyme disease as a let's kill it, or do we perceive it as a, well, let's figure out what we need to do to, change the levers in the immune system so that you don't feel sick as a result of it? Because lots of people have these same things and they're not sick.
It'll be interesting. I think there's room for both approaches. I think it depends on where you are in the infectious process. I mean, clearly, if you've got the flu, you want to kill off that virus.
Yeah.
You've got Ebola, you want to kill off the virus. So there's a part there. But then there is the living with it. I mean, when the plague came through hundreds of years ago, it didn't kill everybody, right? Does that mean they didn't get it? And people talk about their immune system all the time. It's like, oh, I caught this disease from, this bug from my child or from the school or wherever like that. And they never talk about, the bug landing on a healthy person or a not so healthy person, and what was their state, what's the ground that these infections are interacting with.
So one of the listeners asked your perspective on Lyme, and has it changed with all the interviews you've done? And if you're still doing traditional Chinese medicine in your practice, what's kind of changed in terms of your practice over time?
So of course, my take on Lyme disease has evolved after doing 170 whatever interviews it is now. You can't help it. I'm hoping it's getting more nuanced and more evolved and not just more confused. So when I first started, I was pretty simple. It's like, kill the bugs, right? Just exactly what you're talking about. And obviously there's so much more than that. My original approach was kill the bugs, do some detox, get rid of the poisons that the bugs have created in you, and then you'll be okay. And obviously so much more is going on to that. In terms of, I actually practice Five-Element Acupuncture, so it's a little bit different than TCM to begin with. So let's make that distinction. It's splitting hairs in some ways. The needles themselves are almost useless with an infection like Lyme disease. Now, they can help on the autoimmune, maybe immune system regulation, kind of on the other end of things. But if you're in the phase where you're really infected and need help with that, you really have to go the herbal route. You really have to take something external to give your body some extra tools to begin to down-regulate, to kill off some of these microbes. The needles themselves just won't do it. And the other thing that I find is people who've been sick for a long, long time, become depleted. And again, it's one of these, you become depleted slowly and then everything falls apart. So people just get depleted of basic nutrients, whether it's magnesium or potassium or some fat soluble vitamins. And again, you're kind of cruising along suboptimally for a long, long time. Again, the body has all these different pathways to maintain itself. But when it finally gives out, it gives out catastrophically. So whether it's, the mast cells degranulate or, you go into the hospital because you're super low on potassium, all of a sudden, where did that come from? Or your adrenals give out, something like that. So in order to rebuild, you need nutrition. You need a good diet. You may need some supplementation. Some things we can't eat fast enough. You can't eat enough to replenish magnesium. It's easy to eat enough cheese to get enough calcium in your body, but you can't eat enough magnesium. You can't eat enough spinach, and some foods that just depleted of magnesium anyway. So sometimes you need supplements. So that's kind of my thinking. And again, acupuncture is a wonderful tool for modulating once you're to that point where I'm mostly through. And so then the needles can help. But the wisdom in Chinese medicine, again, the herbal medicine that comes along with that is good. And again, my mentor is Greg Lee, and he's brought in all kinds of information from all over the place and using lasers and all these kind of interesting treatments.
My experience with acupuncture over the years is kind of in line with what you were just saying, where, I had tried it 5 or 6 different acupuncturists over many years. I always found it uncomfortable. I actually found the needles painful. I remember one acupuncturist put a needle in. I could feel the needle 2 months later. And I just took a long break from it. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I found an acupuncturist that was phenomenal. I was already in a much better place. And now I continue to do it every 3 weeks just to kind of keep things as balanced as possible. And now I think it's a really critical and helpful tool. And I've heard other practitioners talk about the fact that acupuncture may also work better as we continue to detoxify, that when we're really toxic early on and still have a lot of significant stressors, it may not be the magic that it is as we continue to improve. And then there is a time when, it's magical.
Right. Well, that's the whole idea of, there's this Chinese concept of Gu syndrome, which is this, Greg Lee talks about that.
Yeah, he does.
And so Gu syndrome is oil mixed with flour, and the practitioner's job is they have to separate out the oil from the flowers. And what they're describing is these stealth infections that get inside. One of the things I do find useful, however, kind of in the throes of it, is there is a treatment in Five-Element Acupuncture that we call possession. So Gu syndrome is actually a possession. You're possessed on the outside. You're possessed by this infection. And this possession treatment helps kind of get your mind straight a little bit and gives you a more sense that, okay, I can, even though I've got this infection, it's not the one that's in control. It's a funny, subtle treatment, but it can really kind of restore your sense of power. And I do find that treatment can be helpful early on. People kind of in the throes of, their life is out of control and maybe they're having Lyme rage and all this other crazy stuff. This possession treatment can, create this little bit of separation that says, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I can handle this.
Well, and the nice part is acupuncturists also have many other tools besides just their needles. So, I would love to find an acupuncturist in my area that did the wet cupping. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to find. So I'm envious of you being back there doing that. And great. Well, because that sounds like, that would be a tool I would definitely be drawn to. Unfortunately, I haven't found anyone to do that. Let's talk a little bit as we start kind of wrapping up about Lyme Ninja Radio. You're coming up on your 200th episode. Will be here before too long. You've been at this for, I think, about 4 years. So how did you and Aurora, who's your daughter, as I understand, decide to start Lyme Ninja Radio? How did you come up with the idea? And then what's your vision for Lyme Ninja Radio?
Wow. So I'm visual. So I had this idea of having a ninja going in there and sneaking around and killing the Borrelia. That's kind of my initial thought. So that's where the ninja comes from, right? You can't take this disease head on with an army. You need a ninja to get in there and kind of clean it up. So that's where the ninja part comes from. And it's just, I have a playful personality. So that's why the cartoon ninja. And some people, I've heard people say, well, I didn't really take you seriously because of the Lyme Ninja. And then I started listening and, you're not so bad. But it's 4 years now. There's no going back with Lyme Ninja. So at the time I was listening to Katina Macris, and her radio show was on a podcast.
Yep.
And Katina, sorry if you're listening, I was listening to her and said, if she can do this, I can do this. Right? And then the other thing was, what better way to interview experts to learn about Lyme disease to say, hey, I've got this podcast. Would you like to be on it? And sure enough, people in the Lyme community were super generous. And I called them up or emailed them, and they said, sure, I'll be on your show. And I had zero track record, right? So that's how it began. So it's like, I can teach myself, I can learn and help the community at the same time. So that was the genesis of it. And then it became clearly I needed some help, and I begged my daughter, please, you got to help me do this. So she's come in on the back end and just helps a lot with the technical things and setting up interviews. And you know how much is involved with this.
Yeah.
It just can be overwhelming at times. So she's been a huge help. And, how you keep doing it, you just keep doing it week after week. You don't stop.
I love being able to pick people's brains for free that I used to pay hundreds of dollars to talk to for 20 minutes. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's
and
on a selfish level, on a purely selfish level, that's exactly what it's about.
And then all the great feedback you get from people being informed and empowered by being able to connect through the podcast with these people that they really look up to and are interested in hearing about their approaches. I mean, I think it's really, really powerful. I definitely have listened to a number of your shows and continue to look forward to them. Let's talk about your top 10 guests. And then I'm just going to go from number 10 to number 1. And maybe you just have a couple thoughts that pop into your mind in terms of the things that really stood out, kind of your key takeaways from each of those interviews. So at number 10, you had Heather Peretta.
Heather Peretta was my first guest, and she's a friend. And it's amazing how her story has resonated with people. We've had her on the show 3 times, and her openness in talking about her struggles and successes with Lyme disease has really been amazing. And really, one of her big takeaways was the ketogenic diet. So that kind of supported my kind of fandom of ketogenic diets.
Awesome. So number 9, Chris Masterjohn.
So he's one of those people who's been out there in the Western price world and is really an expert on fat-based nutrition and nutrition in general. And he's one of those people who's like, just, wow, I get to talk to you. So he was on that list of so cool, I get to talk to him. And he's brilliant. If you don't know anything about Chris Masterjohn, he's got his own business going on now, doing some consulting, and his writing that he's done for Western Price on fat soluble vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2 is just stellar. The guy's a genius.
Awesome. Number 8, Lorraine Johnson, who's a friend of mine as well. I love Lorraine.
Exactly. I mean, what can't you say about Lorraine and her work?
Yeah.
And the interview we did really is about the MyLyme database, and that's fascinating. That's a great tool for practitioners and researchers to go in there and try to sort out. If you think there's a connection to Lyme disease, you can actually go into this database and see, people with Lyme disease also have these problems.
Number 7, Dr. Richard Horowitz.
He's the man. And he was one of those, I called his office and he said, sure. If there's a microphone, he'll talk to it. His commitment to sharing the message is amazing. And, he is Western medicine through and through. And I think there's a big place for people like him. But his whole idea of the MSIDs is so important. And it's overwhelming because you got these 19 different points. But his idea that, look, it's not just this bug that's involved with your illness is critical.
Absolutely agree. Number 6, Dr. Sally Schultz.
Sally is very, very interesting. And again, her message is about nutrition and genetics. And she was a character. It's interesting that her message resonated with some of the people. I found her actually be a little bit difficult. She was very much my way or the highway kind of thing. But her message resonates with people. So she's up at number 6.
Awesome. Number 5, Dr. Bill Rawls.
Bill Rawls is a sweetheart. And he's got a new book out there. If you haven't gotten Unlocking Lyme Disease, I believe it is.
Unlocking Lyme, yeah.
Yep. And his story, a transformation that I love, from the Western mindset to embracing a little bit more or a lot more of the herbal side of things, I think is instructive and will help a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Number 4, Brenda Cosentino.
Yes, the real food rebel. And it's another of the diet-based interviews. And she just says, eat food, stop eating junk. And it's so true.
Number 3, Dr. Terry Walls. It's interesting how many of these are diet and nutrition. Quite a few of them here, right?
It really is. And that's kind of the meta message is all that is diet is important. And people are trying to figure out what to eat. Mm-hmm. They're trying to figure it out. So Terry Walls, same thing, as she had MS and took care of herself with diet. And basically she's saying, eat real food, similar to Brenda Cosentino, lots of vegetables. She says eat lots of vegetables and cut back on the junk. So another great story. She has great stuff out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Number 2, Morley Robbins.
Have you talked with Morley?
I have not talked to him on the show yet, but we have talked separately.
Yeah, I know he contacted you about the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Morley Robbins is a character. He thinks he has discovered the unified theory of health. And he may be right. However, he's also very dogmatic about it. So it's very, very interesting to talk to him. On one hand, you want to hit him on the head. On the other hand, you want to say, something, you may have something here. So his message is very interesting. What I do love about his intervention is it's very simple. And it's not crazy. So again, he talks about diet and some fundamental foods, some nutrient-dense foods, and magnesium and other minerals. Really the regulation of iron within the body causing all kinds of extra inflammation.
Which is also kind of tied into one of the thoughts of the number 1 guest on the show, which was Bob Miller.
Exactly. And that's one reason why I was able to hear what Morley was saying, because of following Bob's work and all the work he's done with the different causes of inflammation and iron dysregulation in the body and histamine dysregulation. And it started with his work. So I've connected those two. It'll be interesting to see if they are able to work together.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. Some great guest. Tell us a little bit about the Lyme Symptom Tracker that you created. What are the goals of that? How does it work? How do people access it?
The Lyme Symptom Tracker, let's see, lymeningeradio.com/tracker is how you get to it. And it's a tool based on Dr. Horowitz's Lyme questionnaire. And I've taken out some of the questions that kind of are for somebody who's getting diagnosed for the first time. And what it is, you talk to people and my patients or other people, and they don't know from month to month, week to week, or am I getting better or not? Because, well, my wrist feels better, but my knee feels worse. And this, so we need some way to track. And most people, if you're tracking week to week, sometimes things aren't changing or they're changing too fast. So if you're tracking daily or weekly, you can get overwhelmed with all the data points. If you're tracking every 6 months, you may miss something. So we think about once a month is about right. And it's just a list of the most common Lyme symptoms, your sleep, pain levels, things with that. And it gives you a score at the end. So if you fill this out consistently once a month, it's not too onerous. It takes about 7 minutes. You can do it online and it gives you a number and you have a copy of your answers. And then you can kind of track over a year's time. If you start using this over time, am I actually getting better or not? And then you can go down the list and say, well, as a matter of fact, I am.
And have there been some things that you've learned out of kind of looking at the data that people have put into the tracker? Are you able to come into any conclusions?
Well, now that we've got hundreds of people who've taken the survey, it's amazing kind of where the most prominent symptoms are. And really fatigue and sleep are, next to pain. It's kind of like those three things are the leading characteristics. And then it's also interesting to see, things like libido and sexual performance and the kind of things out there that you wouldn't normally think about. A number of people, it's a significant problem. So again, Lyme and its co-infections in this whole universe, it can affect people in so many different ways, but definitely kind of like the mitochondrial clobbering that happens with people, and how it affects just cognition, ability to sleep, ability to have the resources and the energy to make it through the day.
Excellent. So as we wrap up, what Lyme Ninja tip of the day can you share with us?
Did you know?
Awesome.
The Lyme, let's see. Sleep. You got to begin with sleep. If you don't have your sleep under control, you can't heal. And you gotta crack that nut. Have a sleep study done. Maybe you do have underlying apnea of some type. You can have, throat-based breathing apnea. You can have brain-based apnea that wakes you up that way. You can have restless legs. So there are different types of apnea.
You can have a smart meter on the outside of your bedroom wall. You can have EMF exposure. But I agree with you. It is critical to figure that one out.
It is. You need the yin. You need to come into the quiet place. Your body needs that in order to heal. And if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. It's that painfully simple.
So last question that I ask every guest, what are some of the key things that you do on a daily basis in support of your own health?
I do take supplements and herbs. I'm taking the Biocidin now. I do tend to rotate through the supplements. I have been taking cod liver oil, and I do take the Green Pastures combination fermented cod liver oil and butter oil together. I find that works for me. So that I try to stay away from the sugars and the wheats and the things like that. And I'm not perfect, but in general, I would try to base my diet on vegetables and fat and some clean protein. So that's 2. And the third thing that I do for myself, this is actually something I'm working on. I don't play enough. I'm a very serious person. I take myself way too seriously.
Me too.
It's like I just lighten up. About 20 years ago, I was going through this program. And part of it was rappelling down the side of a small cliff, and I'm going to do this right, and I was a young man. And the instructor kind of leans over the edge and he whispers, he says, you can have fun doing this. And it's like, okay. So it's like to find the joy and play in life. It's all there. It's within your grasp. And if you just take a breath from time to time. So that's kind of my learning edge is, life is fun if you allow it.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's such a good way to wrap up. I appreciate you taking time to be here today. I appreciate Lyme Ninja Radio. I'm always excited to see who's coming on as a guest and to listen to the shows. I love it. It's been fantastically informative and empowering for people. So thanks for everything that you do. Hopefully we'll actually get to meet in person someday at one of these conferences, but I appreciate you and all the great work that you're doing, Mackay.
Well, Scott, you're an inspiration. I feel exactly the same way. So we got a mutual fan club going on here.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
To learn more about today's guest, visit LymeNinjaRadio.com. That's LymeNinjaRadio.com. Thanks for your interest in today's show. If you'd like to follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you can find me there as Better Health Guy. To support the show, please visit BetterHealthGuy.com/donate. If you'd like to be added to my newsletter, visit BetterHealthGuy.com/newsletters. And this and other shows can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit BetterHealthGuy.com.